Hello there and welcome to Luminar NEO All Sliders Explained, the show where we describe and explain you every single slider in this powerful photo editing application. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jacob Bors and I'm a creator and founder of Clever Photographer. Now, before we're going to start, I have a few things I want to cover. First of all, at the end of the video, we're going to give you our own and very popular Luminar NEO shortcut cheat sheet. So stay until the end so you can get your own copy. The second, if you want to follow us along, make sure you head into the description, follow the link there and get your sample files before we're going to start. If you don't own Luminar NEO, you can also follow the link in the description and use our own discount code Clever Photographer. That way you get additional 20% off and you can get your own copy. And finally, we want to ask you to like and comment on our videos and also follow our channel so we can keep creating content like this. In today's video tutorial, we're going to be looking at one of the color grading tools here in Luminar NEO, specifically the toning tool. Now, the toning tool isn't the most frequently used tool here in Luminar. However, I still think it's going to be handy for you to know how it works and how we can use it on our own images. Now, the toning tool in Luminar NEO can dramatically change the mood and the temperature of your photos. This tool offers a classic color grading technique designed for split toning adjustments. Now, if you never used split toning before, the split toning allows you to add two-tone treatments to your images. And you can simply choose color tint for highlights or shadows, and then you set the transition between them. So we are back in Luminar NEO, we are in the edit module, and we have this example right here that will help us to understand the tool and all of its sliders. So let's jump to the tool. Once again, we are in a creative section here and we are looking at the toning. So starting with the slider number 1, the amount. This slider sets the overall strength of the color toning applied to the image. As you can see, by default is 50. However, when it says 50, before you do anything to it, all the rest of the sliders are grayed out. It basically means that the tool isn't applied to your image. It's only when you push the slider, then the rest of the sliders become available. So let's do that. Let's push it all the way to 100. And as you can see, now we can start to play around with the other sliders. Now, before we jump to the rest of it, two things I want to remind you here. Whenever we're going to be working with the sliders today, I really want you to go ahead and push them as far as you can to really see the effect they have to your images. It's no point to go somewhere around 4 or 5 and not understanding what each of the slider do. Then also the next thing, to reset the slider, all you need to do is to double click on its name and it resets it to 0 or the default value. So now we understand the amount, which basically, just like many times before, adjusts the strength of the effect applied to your image. And now we can move to the other sections. And the next option here is this switch button between the highlights and shadows. Just a quick reminder, highlights represents the brightest part of your image and shadows represent the darkest parts of your image. Then coming back to what is the split toning, the idea here is to choose the tint or color separately for shadows or highlights. So by knowing that, let's start by looking at the highlights and describing its own sliders here. So the first option here is called saturation, and saturation for highlights increases the intensity of the color in the bright areas of the image. So let's go ahead and push it, and we push it all the way. And as you can see, except the white, everything else on the bright side is getting red. Now at the moment it's getting red because our next slider, the hue, is set to red. And the hue slider offers the spectrum of colors to choose for the toning of the bright values in the scene. So now as I'm gonna push the hue slider, you will see how the color in the bright part of the image is going to change. Now we're getting the red to start with, then we're going into the orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and back to red. So basically this is how you choose the color for the bright parts of your image. So that's the highlights. Now let's switch the button to shadows and once again look at the sliders. So starting with the saturation, this slider increases the color intensity in the darker areas of your image. So let's push it again to 100. And once again you can see that pretty much everything except the black is in the darker areas getting red. And red again, because our hue slider is sitting on the red here. And again, just to remind ourselves, the hue slider offers the spectrum of the colors to choose for the toning of the darker areas. So when I push it to, let's say, a blue, then you can see that the darker areas of the image are blue. And now to finish the tool off, we have the final slider here, and it's called balance. And the balance slider shifts the balance between the highlights adjustments and shadows adjustments. So let's have a look at it. When we shift the balance slider towards the left, you will see how the shadow color overtaking the highlights. So pretty much everything from the darker areas shifted towards the bright. Now we reset it again by double click, and when we go to the opposite side, you will see how the highlight color, the red, overtaking the shadows until it completely disappears. And now we have everything we talked about on the beginning of the tutorial when we were talking about the split toning. Just to remind you, split toning is about choosing a different color for the highlights, different color for the shadows, and then adjusting the balance between them. So we have our red for the highlights, blue for the shadows, and we know how to use the slider for balance the colors between each other. But of course, this is very basic on this black and white image, but let's see how we can use it in the actual real image situation. So we are here in catalog, and before we're gonna start editing, I just want to remind you, if you want to follow me along, make sure you jump into the description, follow the link there, and that will bring you to our Dropbox account, and you can simply download these sample files and follow me along on your own computer. Now the next thing I wanted to mention is that the toning as a part of color grading tool can be made very complicated. You can jump into the color wheels and start to talk about the different relationship between the colors, and you can totally go ahead and do that and learn more about it around the internet. But today we're talking about the tool, and I want to show you how you can really simply use this tool to add a little bit extra to your images. So let's go ahead and start with the simple example. We're going to use this autumn picture right here, and we will bring it into our edit module. From here, we're going to go into our toning, and really the idea here is to choose a similar colors for highlights and shadows and just add a little bit of warm feeling to the overall image. So let's start by highlights, and once again, as you can see, the tool isn't available until I shift the amount slider. So to start with, let's push it all the way. Then we move into the saturation, and for us, in order to be able to choose the color, we will push the saturation all the way up. So now I'm looking at the color and I'm thinking I like something between red, yellow and orange. So when we push it to maybe something like this, I'm quite happy with it. Now the value is 22. Obviously it's too strong, so we will bring it down to something like this. Let's start with 66 and then we'll see how we're gonna get on. Then we move into the shadows, and again, let's push the saturation all the way, and let's try to pick a similar value, so 22. And again, we're gonna bring the saturation down until something we like. So I quite like what we created here. However, I think the effect is a little bit too strong. Now, of course, we can go ahead and adjust the saturation here and saturation in the highlights, but to make it a little bit easier, we can just go back to the amount slider and bring the overall effect down. Now we can shift it down until we like the result, and I think somewhere around here is on the edge of being natural and still nice and warm. Now let's have a look at the before and after. And there you have it. It's really this simple. So this is an example where we go ahead and add a similar color to the highlights and shadows. So in the next example, I want to show you how we're going to try to add a different color in the highlights and different color into the shadows. So the next image we're going to be working on is this lady right here sitting on the beach. And what we're going to be doing, we're going to try to recreate the popular orange and teal effect. So for that, we're going to be going into our toning tool. Let's make it nice and visible. And we're going to start by pushing the slider to activate the tool. So we push it all the way. And then we're going to have a look at the highlights. Now to create this teal and orange effect, we have to push some blue into the highlights. So let's push the saturation. And really what we're adding isn't a blue. It's somewhere between green and blue. So somewhere around here. Now, obviously, this is way too strong. However, we can totally bring it back by shifting the saturation down. So let's leave it somewhere around here. Now, the next thing we want to do is to add some warmth into the shadows and to her skin. So we switch to the shadows, push the saturation, and as you can see, we're getting a nice and red color on the lady, so she looks a little bit like a sunburn. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna shift it until we get a little more natural color. So something like this. Once again, of course, not that strong. We're gonna bring the saturation down until we see something we like. Now, of course, we can go into the balance and see what we want to create here, but really, this isn't the example where the balance is as important. And also, we can play around with the balance by using the saturation sliders. Now, the overall effect is really nice. However, once again, it's a little bit too strong. So we can go back to our amount slider, bring the slider down a little bit until we get something we like. So let's have a look at before and after, and I think the result is quite trendy. This is something that is very popular, definitely in the summer months, around internet, on Instagram and so on, and I think it's cool to know how you can recreate it here in Luminar, and also how you can use this tool to create effects like this. And now to have a little bit more fun, we're gonna edit the picture number 3 and we're gonna create something that is called Hollywood look. So let's click on the image. Obviously it's in New York. We're gonna bring it into the edit module and let's talk about what we're gonna try to create. Now, if you ever watch Hollywood movies, the color toning in them is following. They have a green or blue in their shadows and they have a yellow or purple in their highlights. So let me show you how we're gonna do this. We're gonna jump into our toning tool, again, make it nice and visible, and let's start by adding a green into our shadows. So once again, amount all the way, shadows, saturation all the way, and let's pick the correct color. So we don't want it completely green, but I think something like this to start with. Then we jump into our highlights, and in the highlights, to start with, let's go for the yellow. So saturation all the way, and yellow somewhere here. So once we're happy with this, we need to adjust the saturation. We don't want it that strong. So in this case, let's bring the saturation down to something like this, and then we switch to the shadows and bring the saturation there. So something like this. Now let's have a look at the before and after. I hope you see what we're getting. And then now maybe a little bit less saturation on both of them, and we can jump into the balance and see the balance between them and see what we prefer. So I think something like this looks really, really cool. So this is the before and after. Now the second option in Hollywood movies is instead of using yellow in the highlights to use magenta or red. So let's give it a go. We're gonna go into our hue and shift it into the magenta or red. So I think something like this looks really, really good. We can of course adjust the saturation if we think it's a little bit too purple and leave it the way it is. Once again, before and after. So there you have it. You can see that there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of when it comes to split toning or toning here in Luminar NEO. It can be a lot of fun and it can very easily take your images into the directions you didn't expect. Now before we're gonna finish, let's run through it one more time. So the toning tool here in Luminar NEO allows you to add a different tint into the highlights and shadows. Now you can start by using the amount slider, controlling the effect on the overall image. Then you switch between shadows and highlights and use the saturation and hue to adjust the different color in hue and the strength of the color with saturation. Once you have your colors or tints set, you can use the balance slider to adjust the balance between the two different colors. So now it's time to get your own Luminar NEO shortcut cheat sheet. All you have to do is to head to our website cleverphotographer.com/luminargift and get it right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had fun and I hope you learned something new. Please don't forget to follow our channel and also check out our other videos covering Luminar NEO. For today, thank you very much for watching. My name was Jacob Bors and I can't wait to see you in the next one.